Why, hello there. I am starting a new series where I give book recommendations based off of your astrology sign. I am so excited for this. I love making me a good list. What's better than a goofy list that's made up of stars and whatever other nonsense? Let's get into it. Today we're going to be doing Scorpio. Yo, 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 Scorpios. So excited to start with y'all. It was pretty easy coming up with you guys because I think I have your taste, your book flavor on lock. So for those who are less familiar of the Scorpio energy, here are a few words that I found in a Google search just on the interwebs that I use to kind of harness the recommendations around. Scorpios love intensity. They're determined, interested in that behind the scenes power. They are very fascinated by willpower. They also have a lot of it, and also are intrigued by like the darker side of life, like kind of what is revealed in the darker parts of humanity. So I have 6 recommendations for you guys. First is After the First Death by Robert Cormier. I read this as a teenager, rocked my world. It was so groundbreaking as a young adult book, as being read by a young adult, but I think you could enjoy it at any age. My boy Robert don't play. He goes hard. He doesn't do the cliche where like people are safe if they're the protagonist. It's wild. I want to read you what they have on Goodreads as the little description synopsis because I think it encapsulates the vibe. Who will be the next to die? They've taken the children and the son of a general. But that isn't enough. More horrors must come. ... Damn, son. And so like it actually starts years after the event, and then you do a flashback into the situation where these terrorists kidnap a bus full of children. And you have 3 different points of view, and it's just, I think it's so up a Scorpio's alley to be like, you have an unhappy ending, you have all the elements of like the darker parts of humanity and just like those horrible situations, and like you have murder, you have suicide, you have kidnapping, you have terrorism, you have hatred for other people, the fear of are you going to be the next victim? All this stuff. It's a very compact read, and so much happens in it. There's such intensity. It's a real page turner. If you haven't read this, get on it. I think it's a really good read. It's a really hard read if you know, like it's not the easiest subject material, but very well done. As I was researching for this video, come find out my boy Robert is like, yeah, I write adult books, but for some reason, because my protagonists or like the people I write about are teenagers, it keeps getting published in young adult. Yeah, that tracks. It's heavy. Like, not saying that young adults can't handle it, but it was a bit shocking that that was allowed in my school curriculum. Next, Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. So this is a short story collection, and again, it is full of that intensity, those like deep, dark emotions and feelings that we tend to bottle up or like push down or be ashamed of. Like it deals with grief and guilt and violence and sexual assault and abduction, and you have these flawed women that like Roxane really pushes the edge of like unlikable characters, and like there's a whole kit and caboodle can of worms that I probably shouldn't have brought up with that as far as like, do characters need to be likable, but it's a really interesting short story collection in a lot of ways, but one of them definitely is kind of a master class in just flawed, misguided, broken human beings just doing what they can in the world. And sometimes they make mistakes, sometimes they do horrible things, they're in hard situations, and I think that willpower to survive, that willpower to keep going or to try to get what they want. It's very much Scorpio energy. There's a fire in each of these stories and in each of these women. I also think Scorpios aren't afraid to be difficult or to be too much or unlikable. So I think you might might have your new fictional fave. So next we have House of Stairs by William Sleater. This is technically young adult dystopian slash horror, but I think it will still hold up for adults because it is, the plot twist might not be as plot twisty for us, but I still think it's very well written and very like, oof. But if you're a young adult, like, oh my God, again, this is one of those books where I'm just like, oof, this ends. Like, this isn't, it's not wrapped up with a bow, people. It's, you're in it. And so I want to read again the description synopsis that's on Goodreads because again, I think it just so encapsulates the book. One by one, 5 16-year-old orphans are brought to a strange building. It is not a prison, not a hospital. It has no walls, no ceiling, no floor. Nothing but endless flights of stairs leading nowhere, except back to a strange red machine. The 5 must learn to love the machine and let it rule their lives. But will they let it kill their souls? And so, much like that, you have this nefarious element, this mystery. And even if you determine what the mystery is, because again, if you're older, you might be more familiar with dystopian trends, but the psychological possibilities I think is still pretty scary. You know, like there's some stories where there's a dystopian that's like, well, that's never gonna happen. But like, oof, like doing this to orphans and like, poor children, like the choices they have to make regarding themselves, each other, that machine. I don't want to spoil it, so I'm just making noises now, so it's probably time to move on. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. This is like a mystery thriller, I guess, psychological thriller. There's so many moving parts. There's a huge cast of characters in this, and I read it a bajillion years ago, but the keys to lock in on is that there's some really nasty, violent, grotesque stuff that happens in this book that I think just took me off guard. And I'm a girl who grew up watching Snapped and Forensic Files and stuff like that. So this is good Scorpio energy right there. You have, again, very dysfunctional, problematic characters. And the plot kind of kicks off with there's this girl from a wealthy family who went missing 40 years ago, and her uncle hires a journalist to investigate like what the fluke happened. Was she murdered? Who by? Did she run away? Why? Go. Figure it out. The journalist ends up coming and teaming up with this like antisocial female hacker, and she's kind of got a disturbed background and had a lot of nasty shit happen to her. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a very heavy like thing. I will give the disclaimer that you need to get past the first like 150 pages because it's like really boring backstory. I think that could have been edited better, but it is what it is. So you got the webs with like this kind of mystery thriller that I also think Scorpios dig. They like the relationship pools and interconnections and the obvious and not so obvious motives and agendas of the different people at play. And then you also have the historical element of it being a cold case and her disappearing 40 years ago and like who's still around, who would have been there at the original last sighting. There's a lot of threads to pull apart, which I think is what Scorpios do in their spare time. And it's a series if you enjoy it. So you have more to munch on. I only read the first 3 because that's what the original author wrote before he died, and then someone else took it up. But it was definitely a very engrossing narrative. We have 2 more. In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami. This is a Japanese translated horror slash thriller. And so for those who like that genre, this might be a great blend of familiar but also a little bit different because you have it from an Eastern style perspective on some maybe common or less common tropes of the genre. Essentially, in a nutshell, there's this dude, Kenji, and he's this like nighttime tour guide for like the sleazy nightlife of Tokyo. And he just kind of hauls a bunch of like tourists to like all these like not so great places to like drink and gamble and sexual stuff and all of that nonsense. This particular night, he is guiding around this really weird dude. He's this like overweight American tourist, but his behavior is super strange. As the night goes on, the things that this guy is doing is making Kenji suspicious that he might actually be a serial killer, the very serial killer that is currently terrorizing Tokyo and like these areas with his violent murders. So, a little scary, a little precarious, because it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? Is he gonna kill me? I don't want to anger him because I don't want him to kill me. In some ways, it almost becomes like a cat and mouse game of him being like, how do I get out of this? Am I just crazy? Am I overthinking this? And so it was a really interesting lens to see a thriller through. You know, you have this Japanese author, you have this Japanese setting and Japanese narrator and this perspective of this less glamorous side of Tokyo mixed in with like kind of the commentary about American tourism and modern life and morals and ethics, and it's just a really interesting blend of material there for you guys to dive into. If that sounds good to you, if you like that genre, I think this is gonna be a good Scorpio book. And last, we have one nonfiction. Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen. This is a psychological memoir taking place in the 1960s where she actually ends up in like a psych ward for 2 years. You might be familiar with the name because it was made into a movie with Winona Ryder, Angelina Jolie, Brittany Murphy, I think, what's her name? Whoopi Goldberg. Like a lot of big names in that movie. So you have all of the like juicy psychological fuck-uppery that Scorpios like. And then like, here's the real deal. It's like nonfiction. It's, you know, true story of this woman and this interesting frame. Again, you have this behind the scenes deep dive into mental health. You have this behind the scenes into the mental health like industrial complex, what is understood and not understood about these different mental situations combined with just like sexism and the perpetual struggle of women to just be understood without being thrown away in a fucking hospital. So yeah, you got that historical element, you have that psychological element, that gender, socioeconomic element, and it's just really well written and pretty fast to get through. I remember it having short chapters and it's not a very long book, and it's just really reflective on what is humanity? What do we do with these feelings that feel yucky? What do we do if we're, you know, up and down in mood? Like, is the answer counseling? Is it going to a hospital? Is it pills? Talking to someone? Like, and what happens if we live in a family or in a society that rejects that and wants to exile us and, you know, ship us off away from that? Be like, you very conditional love. I found it a really fascinating read. I think Scorpios would eat this up. Like, this was really interesting list to create. Scorpios, they have a certain mindset going into a book, I think, and like they want to feel it all, they want to see it all. They don't have time for the niceties and the small talk. They're like, no, like go to the deepest, hardest moment and start there. I would be curious to see from you Scorpios what you thought of my list. Do you agree or disagree? What would you add to the Scorpio book rec list? And don't forget to like and subscribe. And which astrology signs should I do next? Let me know to one or all down below, and I will see you next time.